Alright, welcome back to Lou's Demos, talking about the Pan OS 10 in the respect of the CCD. What are some of the different things you can do or you should look at on configuring your Palo Alto? So here's a couple things couple tips I want to recommend to you. One of the first things you want to do is go into your device setup management interface. Make sure you have the IP address is correct that you want it to be, and your default gateway, things like that. Add an ACL, so you can add an ACL to the management interface. So log it down by a particular IP address that you only want this to be accessible, like your subnet, or maybe one or two machines. But here's a caveat: if you're doing that, if they own those machines, you can't go back in here. So you may want to reduce how many people can access it. One of the other things I would recommend is knowing how to do a couple things in the command line, which I'll talk about at the end. Here, you want to make sure, do you want to allow them SSH access? Maybe you don't. Or maybe you want to use it. HTTPS. Maybe you want to turn off ping so they just can't, why give them a helping hand? Make sure other services that you may or may not need, like SNMP. So look at these things and make sure you do or don't need those services. They may be, some services are configured there for the red team and some of it's for actually scoring. So make sure you look at your administrative part here. Again, set up a block of IP addresses. Add the changes to it. So you can just go add. You can just do an individual IP, or you can do a block, add a little description so you know what you changed. Other things you may want to look at too, under your service, make sure you have a valid DNS server so you can get your updates. Next thing you want to do is go to your dynamic updates. Go to licensing and just make sure that it's up to date with its licensing keys. It should be. And then go to dynamic updates and do a check now, get your latest updates, and apply those, because these you can apply without the firewall being rebooted, so you don't lose any downtime. So at least go in here and look at those. Next thing I would do is look at the software and see what version of the software you're operating on. Look at the release notes of the newer ones and see if there's any critical vulnerabilities that they can exploit. So, because they'll tell you in the release notes if they fix any critical exploits or anything like that. So you want to make sure you don't have a vulnerable Pan OS version that they can, run an exploit and get in. So look at that. And then if there is a case, you may want to, patch it. But remember, if you're patching, just reboots, you're losing your uptime. So be aware of that. So as a quick mindset, be aware of that. Look at the release notes. Go in there. Other things you may want to look at is go into your administrators and see how many other accounts are in here. If there's multiple accounts, verify who has access to those accounts. And if they're not in your team packet, you may want to question those and saying, okay, because maybe the red team already got in there previously and they have an access account. So be aware of that. These are some of the things you would check. And then the next set of things you're going to want to do is go to your policy, look at your ACLs, because typically they're going to be very simple ACLs, like allow, by default it's going to allow everything, like this one here, but the only difference is you're not going to have your profile is going to be blanked out. There's going to be none by default. This was from an earlier video where I was walking through setting this up. So check your ACLs and make sure you update them correctly. So an example you may want to at least turn on is your profile, because by default this is going to be turned to none. So you're not going to have your URL, your antivirus and all that protection on there. And also enable logging last so you can see your events. You might need to go in there and build more ACLs because maybe they just have an any. So be aware of that. Look at your NAT configurations. Also look at your base forwarding, because maybe they have some configurations in here. So look at these things to make sure that you have the appropriate ACLs, because if you have an any, well, of course everything's going to work because everything is going to be allowed in and out. You don't want that. You want to tighten it down as much as possible. So these two down here, you don't want to mess with these. These are inner zones. If you turn these off, things won't work correctly. So these are your two default ones. In the older version of the PanOS, they didn't have them in here, so people would make another rule that denied something, like I've done that in the past, where it conflicted with this. It would block this out and certain traffic didn't work. So these need to be there. So don't mess with those too much. Again, you might need to create multiple rules, and you want to, add your different profiles, making sure you go onto your objects and create your profile for your antivirus, your anti-spamware, your vulnerability protection, because there's the default settings. It may not do enough for you. You may want to customize these things. So go in here and customize your antivirus, your spyware, your URL filtering. That's not maybe as bigger one, but these three here you want to definitely filter out or set up appropriate level of permissions and apply them to your policy. So this way you will have these things. So those are some of the basic good tips that a lot of times people don't do, because sometimes the firewall may not have the current app ID in there or the threat protection and all that, and then you turn all that on and it doesn't find anything because those databases are not, those definitions, databases are not in there. So again, those are some of the areas you want to at least check, make sure you activate and apply. Some basic things you want to do is know how to, in the command line, enable the web interface, because maybe it's not turned on by default, then you're kind of screwed. So look at making sure you know how to do the command line for that, making sure you know how to commit by command line, and make sure you know how to check for multiple user accounts in command line. Those would be at least the minimum skills you would want to look up for the competition, so you know how to do those in the command line. This way, if for some reason the web interface isn't working, you can go in there, turn it on, turn it off, little things like that. At least also to be able to check your management IP and configuration, how to do those things. So those would be the things I would look up on Palo Alto's site for command line how-tos. And hopefully this will help. All right, looking forward to see you guys in the competition. Good luck. Catch you later. Bye.